Well, thank you, and thank you for inviting me. And, thank you all of you for coming. Yeah, I felt really bad about not being able to come last time around. It seemed like the gods didn't really want me to arrive in London, and I guess that's what happens when you've done a movie called Antichrist. I brought a bunch of different clips from films I worked on, and for me, talking about sound is it's always a bit difficult. I'm getting better at it, but generally, it's quite interesting that when you talk about visuals, there's so many words to describe different visuals. But when you talk about sound, the amount of words are simply much smaller, and it's important to talk about sound. And that's also why I'm very happy to see all you people here, because I feel that sound in filmmaking is such an amazing storytelling tool in a way. It has a way of Walter Murch, the sound designer, who worked with Coppola back in the 70s and kind of coined the term sound designer. He has said that the visuals knock on the front door and the sound creep in from the windows behind you. And I kind of like that description, because it tells us that sound is very much it's a subconscious thing. There's so many subconscious stories being told through sound. It's a very emotional way of expressing a story, and I'd like to, with the clips I'm showing today, talk about the way that I approach sound in its different layers and so on. Most of the clips I brought actually in different so-called premixes, so you hear the layering of sounds that we're doing, because in a way sound is kind of like the most invisible part of the filmmaking, and it's the most invisible part of the film. You say that you'll go see a film. You don't say that you'll go hear a film, therefore, like when you go in the cinema and you experience a film, you mostly notice sound, or a lot of people do. You mostly notice sound if there's something wrong, or if you can't understand the words or something like that. And the amount of detail that is brought into the soundtrack, you really shouldn't be aware of how detailed it is. So that's why I brought these clips with different layers, so that we can actually hear these details and kind of talk about how things are built up. I brought two different films, several clips from each of them. Putin's Kiss and White Black Boy. We'll start out with Putin's Kiss. As the title says, it's a story about Russia. It's directed by a Danish director that I worked with before, and the film is about. It's got. Yeah, that's fine. It's following two different people. A journalist who's critical of the Russian political system, and a young girl, Masha, who's one of the leading figures of the youth movement of Putin's political party. And you follow these two people, and they their destinies, so to say. But I wanted to show just the opening, start out with the opening, and and then we'll take it from there. I think let's start with the clip and see a bit of film.
Как вы уже узнали, вы здесь будете 8 дней, и вас ожидает мощная образовательная программа. Каждый из вас наверняка хотел быть дисциплинированнее, лучше, бросить пить, курить, ругаться матом, найти проект, начать работать. И каждый раз вы говорили: я это сделаю завтра. Итак, завтра, наступает завтра в 8 часов утра. И я обещаю вам, что ровно через 8 дней, когда вы будете уезжать, и вы станете другими людьми. Я вам это обещаю.
Ребята, отпускайте флаг дальше.
Прошло уже 20 лет со времен распада Советского Союза. Тогда, в начале 90-х, после 70 лет диктатуры коммунизма, на свет вновь появилась Россия. И на смену коммунизму пришла демократия и капитализм. Я независимый журналист. И я не принадлежу к числу прокремлевских журналистов. Я хочу рассказать вам историю о современной России. История, которая изменила мою жизнь.
Меня зовут Дрокова Мария. Я родилась в 1989 году в Тамбове. И, наверное, представляю первое постсоветское поколение, которое выросло после того, как закончил свое существование Советский Союз.
О Маше Дроковой я впервые услышал в 2007 году, когда указом президента Путина она, наряду с какими-то большими лидерами Единой России, получила то ли медаль, то ли орден. Последнее десятилетие Путин был самым влиятельным человеком в России. Конечно, это выглядит странно, когда 19-летняя девушка получает высокую государственную награду, и, по крайней мере, я обратил внимание на то, что есть такая Маша Дрокова.
Если узнали, наверное, узнали как девушку, которая поцеловала Путина. Позвольте это сделать? Большое спасибо.
I was asked the other day, why is it that so many Danish documentary filmmakers get so much exposure? Why we have a lot of films traveling around the world on the festival circuit and so on. And my answer was that we have a part of the film school, that's the documentary school, where the headmaster of that department is really into the subjective documentary. For him, the whole kind of neutral journalistic documentary isn't really, for him there's nothing like a neutral documentary, and I find a lot of his thoughts really inspiring in the sense that as soon as you take a camera and point it somewhere, you already made a subjective decision about a documentary. And there's a Danish scriptwriter who recently said that the only difference between fiction films and documentary films is that in fiction films the actors get paid. I find that angle really interesting, and the thing is, for me, working on a film like this, when I'm a part of this process, we very much talk about the emotional content of the film and what kind of atmosphere and what kind of feeling there is in the film, apart of course from the actual storyline that's also very important to bring through, but we talk very much about the vibe, the atmosphere, and the ambiences. Lise Birk Pedersen, she's a Dane who directed this film. I worked on her previous film as well, and so because of her and me knowing each other, then when she started shooting this film, we were already like talking about the film and discussing how could we approach this film sonically. And when I talk sonically, it's both sound and music. For this film, I was, apart from being a sound designer, I was also the music supervisor. So I've also kind of been thinking a lot about the musical side of the whole film. But for me, there's not really that much of a difference. When you do sound design, you also do music in a way. You just, instead of using a guitar and a string orchestra, you use a car and the sound of rain. I mean, you have different sounds that in a way are your instruments, and your instruments to create rhythm, dynamics, ambience, atmosphere, and so on. And something that Lisa and I talked about with this film was that she had this feeling when coming to Moscow about like meeting, in a way, a big beast of a city. Very intense experience, very massive and very overwhelming. And this whole political system that throughout the film is kind of shown in all its horrible ways. The journalist is actually the guy you saw in this clip, the guy getting beat up. That's the journalist who got beaten up by some unknown people, but very much people who were sent by the leading political groups. So we talked about this feeling, this massive feeling, and I was in Moscow 10 years ago, helping out on some film, and I recorded lots of ambiences. When I start out on a film, and I'm usually a part of the process for a long time, starting out with the initial idea on a documentary when the director's shooting already, starting talking about the sound. And the first things I do is usually to, if it's something like this film takes place in Russia, the next film we're going to see takes place in Tanzania. I start researching on the local music, and for this it was, of course, also because I was the music supervisor. So because for me, like, listening to the local music gives a really interesting impression of what kind of country is this, what kind of culture is it, what is it we're trying to depict. And at the same time, I'm spending a lot of time getting ambiences, ambient sounds, city sounds, sounds from the environments that we're going to portray, so that I know how is this environment sounding. I think that's immensely inspiring and very, very important, because when I talk about the subjective approach to doing a documentary, then you still have to really think about each sound in a realistic content, so to say. You have to be aware of what is this environment you're portraying. And for me, because I was in Moscow like 10 years ago, I had also the same impression as Lisa had about this monster of a city, but with so many sounds happening. So I want to show you this beginning of the film where without the music and with only the effects, so you hear the ambiences and how we worked with those. Because I knew that there was going to be music pretty much throughout the beginning of the film, all the sounds that I do are pretty much like layered in a. I often pitch the ambiences so that they fit in tone with the music, so that you cannot. I really like the idea of you cannot really hear when the music stops and the sounds take over. This clip, of course, starts at the youth camp, where you hear a lot of like put-on audience sounds, but that was to create this feeling of being there. We wanted this feeling of that you were in these environments, that this texture of reality. So we start out in the youth camp, and then we go to this surveillance camera. And creating the sound for that was quite difficult because there were no sound on the actual surveillance camera. But when we played it mute, it kind of felt dead in a way. You kind of lost it became. When you play total silence in the cinema, it becomes a little awkward. I like silence in films, but quite often when you talk about silence in films, then you have just a little sound that kind of makes it feel like silence, because otherwise then you start listening to the air condition in the room or other things, and then you're suddenly lost. You're not in the film anymore. So we needed a tiny sound, and I came up with these different, just tiny layers of noise that then when he's being hit, then I just turn up and down this digital humming noise. So it's not really hits you're hearing, it's this noise that just and I quite like that. It almost felt like there was some kind of interactive noise thing going on with the reality and the camera. And then we go to this whole sequence with the sounds of the city. But I think we should just take a look to this, hear this sequence. yeah, it turns almost into like these dark drones of city noise in a way. We had created this whole kind of ambience feel for the beginning, and then when we were mixing the film, suddenly when Putin appeared, he felt like he wasn't really there, and so we added those totally ridiculous footsteps for him that when you hear them now, you think, okay, my God, what's going on? But in when you see it with the whole thing on, then these kind of things are just, well, you had to play them so loud to get it through the music and all that. The film is not supposed to be heard this way. This next clip is from one of the, there's several big demonstrations happening throughout the film, and I wanted to play this next sequence with, we're starting out with just the rough location sound. This was a film where Lisa had, at some points she had a Russian boomer with her. At other points it was just like the camera mic and some radio mics. So generally it was a very, very basic setup, and she really didn't have the possibility of having a big crew around her. She shot the film throughout around 3 years. So it was a long period of shooting, and the storylines and so on changed throughout the film, or throughout the process, and what I usually tell my directors then, because quite often when we also saw it here in the opening, then there's a lot of points where you're just following your characters around with the camera, and it's very gung-ho, crazy style, but you almost always do some establishing shots in some way. And what I tell Lisa is that it's important that when they do these establishing shots, or do, like, for example, these scenes from the youth camp, when she's with the audience, then don't speak, or don't let your photographer speak. Record the sound, even though it's just the camera mic. If you record the sound when you do these establishing shots, then I later on can use that sound as just a background sound, as ambience for the film. And suddenly then for each establishing shot, then suddenly there's a whole archive of ambiences as well. That's generally how, if the shooting is so gung-ho crazy as it was in this film, then that's usually my advice to the filmmaker, to really respect the sound when you're shooting the film as much as you're respecting the image. But let's see one of these demos with only the recorded sound from set, I was almost gonna say.
Сейчас точно опоздаем, блин.
Давай закрой. Восстановись. Окей.
Это наш город!
Это наш город!
Сколько народу-то, а?
Россия без Путина! Россия без Путина! Россия без Путина!
В какой-то момент, особенно после вот знаменитых оранжевых событий на Украине, когда люди поменяли власть, в Кремле началась откровенная паранойя на тему того, что такие же события могут случиться и в России, что люди могут выйти на улицу, выборы пройдут таким образом, что Путин не сможет обеспечить себе необходимый результат.
Путин, лыжи, Магадан! стену!
Вот для того, чтобы этого не произошло, они начали вкладывать деньги в молодежный проект. Ключевая задача анашистов и прочей вот этой вот шпаны заключается в том, чтобы во время каких-то больших политических событий выходить на улицу и занимать все крупнейшие площади в стране.
То, ну, во-первых, очень важно знать заранее, готовы ли они такое мероприятие провести, хотят ли они его провести, где они будут его пытаться провести. Можно начать прямо с того, что занять точку сбора, где будут люди эти собирать. А тут бах, а территория занята. Все, план рушится, в принципе. Это самый простой способ. Таких, как я, не больше, наверное, врать не буду, наверное, человек, наверное, 20, наверное, во всей России, которые профессионально именно этим занимаются.
Россия без Путина! Россия без Путина!
Это борьба не просто за право проводить митинги. Это борьба за гражданское достоинство. Борьба за демократию. Это борьба за то, чтобы наша страна была свободной. На стороне власти сила, но на нашей стороне правда!
Они очень любят говорить о том, что вот у России особый путь, и у России особая демократия. Вот не бывает особой демократии. Демократия либо есть, либо нет. Знаете, у нас в России говорят, не бывает осетрины второй свежести. Она либо свежая, либо не свежая. Вот демократия либо есть, либо ее нет. Не бывает особенной, специфической демократии. Если в какой-то стране говорят, что у нас особенная демократия, это называется диктатурой.
Yeah, as you experience it here, then yeah, it's the experience of this is, yeah, it's not quiet. You get the feeling that something intense is happening, but as you will see now when we move on to the next clip, there's this next version of the mix, which is the final mix. For example, for the demonstration, these shouts that the people are doing, they were shouting that for a long time, so that Lisa could actually walk around the crowd, and while she was shooting, she recorded sound as well. And because she was respectful about recording this sound, then I could use this as simply ambience, or the layering of the demonstration, and get the feeling of this being bigger, and this getting the feeling of the intensity that Lisa talked about when she had been at these demonstrations and felt this intense energy and this power happening, this crowd just being very much in your face. And right now it feels almost like 5 people yelling and then 50 people just standing around. So we really wanted to establish like this intense feeling of being at these demonstrations. So, could we go to the next clip?
Сейчас точно опоздаем, блин.
Вы остаетесь?
Это наш город!
Это наш город!
Сколько народу-то, а?
Россия без Путина! Россия без Путина! Россия без Путина!
В какой-то момент, особенно после вот знаменитых оранжевых событий на Украине, когда люди поменяли власть, в Кремле началась откровенная паранойя на тему того, что такие же события могут случиться и в России, что люди могут выйти на улицу, выборы пройдут таким образом, что Путин не сможет обеспечить себе необходимый результат.
Путин, лыжи, Макаров!
Но для того, чтобы этого не произошло, они начали вкладывать деньги в молодежный проект. Ключевая задача анаршистов и прочей вот этой вот шпаны заключается в том, чтобы во время каких-то больших политических событий выходить на улицу и занимать все крупнейшие площади в стране.
То, ну, во-первых, очень важно знать заранее, готовы ли они такое мероприятие провести, хотят ли они его провести, где они будут его пытаться провести. Можно начать прямо с того, что занять точку сбора, где будут люди эти собирать. А тут бах, а территория занята. Все, план рушится, в принципе. Это самый простой способ.
Тот, кто научится готовить, профессионально планировать и осуществлять массовые акции, получит монополию на организацию.
Yeah, we talked a lot about like this intensity of the film, and then when this guy is just sitting on Google, there's especially some scenes in the Jason Bourne trilogy where Matt Damon is sitting in front of a computer, and it feels like the most intense moments ever. The computer says, and I thought this was a pretty fun way of kind of giving the same kind of intensity to this. And when you see it now you've seen it without these sounds, and now you see it with, and of course it's corny in some way, but it's also kind of establishing this mood of nothing is really quiet. There's a constant bombardment of information, of sounds, and we really wanted to have that feeling pretty much going throughout the film. Of course, we have some quiet moments as well, or we're trying to, but this whole feeling of constantly being bombarded with sound was an important thing. And the thing is that if you bombard the audience with sound, then it won't be long before the audience is really bored, because just a constant stream of noise is just plain boring. I mean, we live in this culture where there's so much noise in our everyday life. I'm quite often wondering why is it that no one kind of made up soundproof or muted toys for like doing road work. Why does road work have to be that noisy? I mean, why didn't no one like? Why do we have to listen to all this noise that's constantly going on in our cities, in our life? And I mean, like, doctors have said that this is actually bad for our health, but still the noise just keeps on going. In that sense, talking about noise in our cities, for me as a sound designer, that's kind of a gift, because when doing a film like this, you can kind of have all these noises playing around, and we as people of the modern world are kind of just saying, well, that's how it is, that's how it sounds. But then at the same time being in charge of the soundtrack, then you also have this ability to suddenly say, well, now we remove all sound, and now we don't hear the exterior world, and now we focus on the interior world. This next clip that I'm going to show is a place where we really played around with the sound surrounding Masha. I think we'll be starting out with the clip. It's her arriving at the political office, and then later on we see her coming back to her apartment. And this first clip will be the full mix, and then I'll talk afterwards about our use of ambiences in this sequence.
Ну, про акцию, короче, акция 8 будет, да? Вот там по этой и другим причинам Василий мне сказал, езжай в Москву и готовься к этой акции. Да?
Если говорить о моих отношениях с Василием, нужно понимать, что одно дело быть в 16-17 лет в чужом городе без родителей, другое дело, когда какое-то время прошло, и когда ты становишься более самостоятельной, поэтому, с одной стороны, эти отношения стали более равноправны, с другой стороны, мои решения, они стали меньше зависеть от мнения Василия.
For us, it was important to establish like the energy of Marcia, but also in a way how she's kind of isolating herself because she's so focused on her career, and she's also, I mean, she's in a way as a lonesome person. You just, but with a really galloping, intense career going on. And I'm gonna show this next clip, which is just the clean sound from set. And the fun thing here is to notice that hopefully you got this impression of this headquarters for the political organization being really active and lots of things happening. Well, then you should see how it actually sounded. So let's start out. So is this real, or is that just something we're trying to say, or is it just us manipulating the audience? Of course it is manipulating in a way, but I feel like it's manipulating in the right way, so to say. It's supporting the story, it's supporting the emotion, and the thing is that you have to be really aware of each sound you pick and tells a story, and you have to be really thinking about what story this sound tells. In the same way as a picture editor has to think about, if you pick these moments in this conversation where they are saying these exact things, what does that mean for the story? When you do sound, you pick these exact sounds because they tell a story, and no matter if it's about the sound of her footsteps, which you heard in the previous clip, for me it was really important that they were kind of like high heels, very precise, like her being like this career girl with a very precise target, like tuck, 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 tuck. And the sounds of people chatting were sounds that I recorded when I was in Moscow. So it's Russian voices. So it's sounds that are handpicked for each moment, and which I feel tells her story in a more clear way and a more emotional way. And yes, it's manipulation, but I think everything is manipulation in a documentary, no matter how neutral you tell the world it is. This is my last clip from Putin, so I was thinking, like, if you have some questions for this whole Putin section, then I could try and answer a few questions now.
The footage in the flat, was that all shot mute?
No, there was sound for that. So in the actual clip you heard her taking out things and playing around with her keys and so on. But I added on lots of textures which are very much like background sounds, and the dog you hear is a dog I recorded in Moscow. So for me, like, kind of, it's a Russian dog. It's it's real. But yeah, Lisa records everything with sound, and that's another thing that be very respectful of sound when you're.
The footsteps coming up the stairs that you hear in the background.
Yeah,
is that sync, or did you add that?
That's just an addition. Like, the idea was the feeling that there's other people in this apartment, and I like this feeling of her. Even when she gets to her apartment, it's noisy and you hear sounds from around, but then you get into her room and it's much more like, whoop. It's kind of like you're with her, and it feels like her intimate space in a way. Later on in the film, there's a couple of scenes where she's in her kitchen, and it kind of feels like a little oasis in a way. And then of course you hear some like dog barking and so on, but there's not any, you don't hear other people. For me, that was important, to get this feeling of her little intimate space in this world of noise in a way.
And it was all done with the camera mic?
Yeah, all the location sound was done here with just the camera mic. But there's not, of course the sound she's doing is from the location, but there's so much added in a way that the thing is that even though the location sound is kind of rough around the edges, but if you add on a little ambience that has maybe some bass to it, or a little more like texture to it, then it also softens the rough location sound in a way that it doesn't feel, it feels like it's just sounding better in a way, because it's that the way our ear works is very much with frequencies, so that if some frequencies are soft, then the other frequencies which were hard once become softer as well. As there's something very interesting going on with just the subconscious way of thinking of approaching sound simply.
You were talking about how you started working creatively with the director from the very beginning, really. What could you talk about at that stage? Because like you say, storylines got lost over that 3 years, the material was coming and going, the film was changing. Would you actually start collecting sound?
I started collecting like Russian sounds and Russian music. So that was very much kind of my starting point of kind of getting the feeling of the country and getting the feeling of... We had this original idea because there was so much... this film is so much about Russia. And we talked about in the beginning that it would be interesting if all the music was Russian music. So there was only going to be Russian music in the film, like classical Russian music, modern Russian music, Russian folk music, whatever. Everything should be Russian music. So I started getting hold of a lot of Russian music and just listening to that for like 3 months. I only listened to Russian music. And in the end, it turned out that, well, it didn't really, we needed some score because it was such a complicated storyline that we needed music that was actually composed to the film to kind of make it more easy to go from these different layers in the storytelling, like making them melt together better. But this whole thing of getting a feeling of what's going on in Russia right now, finding out that, well, they have a very elaborate electronic scene going on. They have just getting the feeling of that inspired me to think, wow, okay, there's a whole environment, this youth movement. They're not just listening to something that was hip in the West 15 years ago. I mean, you have these cliches of a culture, and just getting to know it better through the music and is really important. I think it gives me a lot of inspiration for how the sound should be as well. So I started collecting music, and then I started collecting sounds. And the thing about these sounds is that when I then sit down and listen through, I think I have like 4 or 5 hours of different Moscow ambiences from that trip I did 10 years ago. So I listened through all that, and then I talked with the director and said, well, for me, the feeling of this is that it's going to be a quite noisy film. There's a lot of things going on in the whole soundscape. How do you feel about it? Well, yeah, I get the same feeling. It's a very, lots of things are going on. And the thing about just when I'm starting listening and then talking with the director about listening to things, then she starts listening as well. And when she's on location, which is very important, she's listening. She's not just watching and trying to think about the story. She is listening and listening for sounds and listening if there's anything interesting to record as sonically as well as visually. And that makes a big difference. And then later on during the process, when they start actual picture editing, then I've got and then I'll make a whole bank of sounds in a way that they can pull ambiences from, and I'll make a whole bank of music that they can pull from, so that they are aware of sound when they're picture editing, and it's not just an afterthought. It's something that's a part of the process, and again, they are listening when they're editing and not just looking. And when I was a part of this process for 3 years, and it's not like I've been sound editing for 3 years in a row. It's just that it's been such an elaborate, long process that I've been chiming in now and then with thoughts and ideas. And when they had the first rough cut, we talked about that. And when they had sequences where they needed some sound, I started doing a little bit of sound, just spending a day in the sound studio, doing some rough sketches for them so that they could put it in. And it means that what I often hear from people doing documentaries is that, oh, there's not much time, the budget is low, we don't have the time to do this elaborate sound editing. Well, the thing is that if you're a part of the process for so long, you don't for me, in the sound editing, you spend a lot of time just getting a feel of the project, trying to find out, should this be a noisy film or a quiet film, or how should this sound, and just gathering sounds for the backgrounds and so on. Well, all that has been done when I'm actually starting up my sound editing. So I know exactly what I need to do, and it means that I'm much more effective when we're actually doing the sound editing. For this film we had, I think, a 5-week sound editing period and 3 days of mixing, and that's it. But we were just very effective because we had this long run together, which just made the dialogue, creative dialogue between us much easier. Okay.
What stage in that process did the composer start chiming in?
We kind of realized that at some, I don't know, the composer probably started out like a year before finishing the editing, and I think they were cutting like before finishing the mix, so that I think they were editing for like, I'm not sure, 8 or 9 months or something. So they were probably halfway through the editing when we kind of realized that, okay, it's not going to work with just these historical pieces or these songs or all the other things that I had been collecting. There's still some of that in the film, but it just wasn't helping the story as much as it should. So then the composer had actually helped me out in another film which was happening in Russia, and that film got kind of cancelled, and he had these sketches lying around that we then started playing with, and a lot of that really worked out, so that he just elaborated a bit on those sketches actually. And it's a composer I know very well. I've done like 10 films with him, so he's very open for you cutting around in the music. There's some composers who think that when they delivered a piece of music that it's sacred and you're not allowed to do anything about it. For me, the most interesting composers and film music pieces are the pieces that flow together with the film, and the composers I really like collaborating with are very collaborative. And this Swedish composer who did this, he just said, well, yeah, do whatever, and then delivering things in layers, so that, for example, we had the percussion, the strings, and the melody as 3 separate elements, and then you could cut around in it throughout the picture editing, so that when they were doing the picture editing, they were able to manipulate, but simply almost like pre-mix the music, and it makes the process much easier. Also for the composer afterwards. I mean, working from that.
Sorry, I was quite intrigued when you say you go looking for you went looking for Russian sounds. Logistically, what do? You just turn up in Russia with a microphone and go wherever your instinct tells you to go, or what do you actually do?
For this film, because I had been there like 10 years ago shooting another film, I had recorded lots of ambiences and knew the city, like roughly. But yeah, and then just recorded whatever. I've tried to find all the kind of signature sounds of the city in a way, like how does the sirens sound? How does the train sound? How does the car sound? How does people talking on the street sound? How does a bar sound? How, like, all these sounds that are very like unique to this city in a way. So I recorded lots of that material. But then when I have to gather sounds, I get in touch with people who are from the area, and then I ask them to record sounds or get sounds that they've already recorded. And for me, like Facebook and Twitter, these social networks are amazing for sound people, because you can kind of connect to, I can get, I can get hold of Russian sounds in 2 days. So, I mean, just by connecting with 3 different Russian sound people on the internet, and then they have a bank of sounds that they already recorded. So in that sense, it's become much more easy now to send files back and forth and communicate with like the whole world. And I really, it's an amazing source of inspiration that the World Wide Web has made available to us, and it's such a great resource for sound and filmmaking, and it's there to explore.
You talk about feeling a lot. Are you talking about feelings that were captured by the director in the scene, or are you talking about the feeling you get when you watch the images and knowing what the storyline's going to be?
I think it's a bit of both worlds, actually. I talk a lot with the director about what she has experienced. For Lise, how did she experience this, and what feeling did she get, and what when we have the first, not the first rough cut, but like when we're kind of getting close to where the actual sound editing starts, we go through the film and talk through the film. And of course you can talk about, okay, there's a door closing there, we need a sound for the door because it's not there, and there's a car passing by, we need a sound for the car. But for me, I almost never talk about those things because they are so obvious. Like of course you need a sound for the door closing, of course you need a sound for the car passing. I think it's much more interesting to hear, okay, what's the emotion of this scene? What do we want to tell the audience, and where on the kind of trajectory of the character, what is happening here to her? What should we tell the audience? So in that sense, I talk with the emotions with the director and get her input. But of course, it's also important that when I experience the film, are open for like, what feelings do I get from this material? And then we discuss, okay, I feel that this scene needs more sound or less sound, or and it's very important to remember your initial reaction to a scene. That's very difficult when you then start working on it for days and days and days, because at the end you've kind of almost immune to the original feeling that you got from the scene. So you really have to remember, and I write down a lot of notes for those first kind of passes through the film, just to remember how I kind of experienced it, so that I can go back and kind of, if I'm not sure of how it actually feels, then it's important to remember how you felt the first time you experienced this scene or this sequence. But another thing is also just to talk with people who are a part of the environment. If you haven't been there yourself, I've been to Moscow myself, and I've experienced it, so that I didn't feel like I had to talk with a lot of local people to hear how is the feeling of being in Moscow. But for example, I did a war film from Afghanistan about war veterans, and I talked with soldiers about their experience of being in war, and hearing about their, like they're telling all these stories, and they are also actually quite focused on sound. Just hearing about their first-hand kind of experience of being there, I think that can be immensely inspiring to doing the sound, because then you try to recreate that feeling when you see the film. So yes, for me it's a very emotional thing to do sound for films, and it's a very, because it's so subconscious, then it's also a very emotional expression. Any other? The best sounds I often feel are sounds that are just happening in the moment, and of course I also record some with like really high-tech gear, but a lot of the sounds I use are often like recorded on like these small handy recorders, which sound pretty good actually nowadays. And then when like a lot of these elements that sound a bit abstract are often just like something a recording I've done, and I felt, wow, the recent great sound I heard was the door in my local supermarket back home, which had this sound like when it sounded like 5 kids screaming at once. So I was recording that, and then put that through a reverb and maybe pitch it down a bit, and then you have like the perfect scary sound for someone being hit in the head or something. You just you have to kind of think abstract about sound. That's one of the amazing things about sound, that it can be so abstract. I mean, you can kind of take it from one context and put it into another, as long as you remember to at the same time also like have like environmental sounds that are actual, like realistic in a way. Then I think combining the realistic with the musical sounds often create this like very interesting soundscape where you feel that you're there and it's gritty and it's real, but there's also something there that makes you kind of lean forward and kind of want to listen even more. And I feel that if you lean forward and you see it and listen even more, then you're being fascinated with the film as a whole. You're just more into the story, you're more into the film because you're curious as to what is going on, what is happening.
It sounds much. It kind of starts to sound like drama, like a,
yeah. But in a way, it is. I mean, it's that thing about me. I think that everyone who does a film tells a story, and no matter how abstract it is, and no matter if it's fiction or documentary, we all tell a story, and it's about like getting an emotional experience and getting the audience to feel something, hopefully. My thoughts on sound libraries is that they're very good to have, but generally I really don't like using them. I think lots of the standard sound libraries out there, like Hollywood Edge and all that, the thing about those sound libraries is that the sounds they record are made so that everyone can use them in every film, which means that if you do a horror film, if you do a drama, if you do a documentary, if you do a comedy, you're supposed to be able to use that sound. So all the sounds are very neutral. Like if you hear they got a CD full of car pass-bys. Well, the first car pass-bys sound like this. The next one sounds like this. The fifth one sounds like this. And then the 25th sounds like maybe like. They're pretty much the same, very neutral, very like this. For me, there's not any story being told by the sound. If I want a car passing by in a comedy, then I want some funny element to the sound of this car passing by. I want like the exhaust should sound weird. And if it's a horror film, then there should be some metal scream. And if it's in Moscow, I want it to sound like old and rattling and like. So for each film you do, there's you pick a certain sound because it has a story to tell. And I feel that most sound libraries are not telling stories. It's just a functional library of sound. And I feel that in that sense, then I think every sound should tell a story, and But of course, sound libraries are sometimes the only thing that you can get hold of, and then quite often as sketch sounds, it's better than nothing at least. But I think what's been happening like the last 2 or 3 years is that a lot of independent libraries are coming out, which have really interesting sounds and much more personal, much more textured, much more like so much more personality to those sounds, which I really like. So I've been using a lot of those apart from all the sounds I'm recording myself. But I mean, because I've been recording sounds for like 15 years now, and I've got them all in my database, it's like, I got a library of like 1.5 terabyte of sound, but all registered in a program, so it's easy to find, and just makes it, yeah, it's an invaluable source of sound. But let's move on to the next clip. This is a White Black Boy. It's another film taking place in a faraway world, but again done by a Danish director. Camilla Majid is her name. We're gonna see the opening of the film, and yeah, maybe I shouldn't really say so much. Let's see the opening, and then I can talk about the film afterwards. Yes, this, as it said, it's about albino kids, and especially about Sheeta, who are like moved to this school without their parents, and then staying there and being guarded because they're such a valued possession for other people, and they're getting their arms chopped off, and some kids are getting killed just to get hold of albino parts. It's terrible. So just when I first heard about that, I thought, okay, it's so emotionally overwhelming. But it could also really turn it into like almost like a UNICEF commercial in a way. And we talked very much about making this a story told from the perspective of Sheeta and the kids. And instead of being like the big headmaster in the sky who's gonna tell everybody how sad their lives are, then get the feeling of how is it being a kid there, and what's their life like, and let them and their actions tell the story. What that involved was that most of the movie, the photographer shot like this, like being totally with the kid in their eye line. So the whole film is pretty much shot in a way that it's not POV, but it's you're on the level with the kids. And we wanted to do the same thing about the sound. We wanted this to be like, we wanted it to be an experience where you felt that you were in their height and with them, and you heard the world as they were hearing it. Sound is a special issue here because these kids, they've been so discriminated and so they're so used to being isolated that they don't really talk properly. They whisper all the time. And it's very interesting when you're whispering. There's this intimate space being established at once, and you're very quiet and you're using your ears because what is he saying? What is he whispering about? So that's great for this because then because they're whispering, because they're quiet, because you have to kind of do like that when you're experiencing the film, then you're naturally also experiencing it in a subjective way, actually. You're experiencing it like when you hear someone whispering, you really normally wouldn't hear. I mean, in everyday life, you don't. People should be very close to your ear for you to hear what they're whispering about. Or we should be in this room, which is quite quiet. But it makes it creates a very intimate space, and that was a great thing for this feeling of this film, that you've established a very intimate space, also sonically with these kids. This was another film that took like 3 years. When reading in the program about me, then it says, just during the last year, Peter has done so many films. Well, actually, during like the last 5 years, I've done these films, but they just all happened to come out during the last year. This one was, Camilla went down there, I think 6 times all in all, like shooting at different times, and there kind of in getting like the starting up of the school, the Christmas at the school, some exams and so on. So you get this whole storyline of the school throughout the film, watching the film. But sonically, we really wanted to create this subjective space, and I was supposed to go down there to Tanzania to record ambiences, but in the 3 years that this film took to develop, I had 2 kids, and suddenly it wasn't really that. It wasn't really like going to Tanzania for 4 weeks and being in the middle of a lawless country wasn't really like an issue for me, so an option for me. So I got hold of a friend of mine, a sound artist called Jakob Kirkegaard. He's a Danish sound artist, but he lives in Berlin, and he's actually in London this weekend. He's an amazing sound artist who works with a special microphone called an accelerometer. It's a kind of contact microphone which works. A contact microphone works in that way that you put it on a surface, and then it records the vibration of the material, and the vibrations of the material turn into sound. Because in a way, like every material is like every particle is things moving around. So in a way, like the whole world is based on sound, sound waves. So you can actually record materials, the sound of like that ventilator right there would have a really interesting sound. I'd say that 70% of David Lynch's sound design is created with air conditioners like that. Then he pitches them down and so on. But what we did here was that Jakob then went with Camilla and the photographer Talib to Tanzania when they were doing their last trip down there. And then Jakob had these microphones with him, so he recorded like natural ambiences, a lot of them for me, but he also did a lot of these special recordings. And what was really great about that was that he was in the situations when they were being shot, so that, for example, like we're gonna see the first exam that Sheeta, the first exam for Sheeta, and Jakob, when he was there, he saw these bars for the window. And he thought, wow, how about recording the sound of the class from those bars so that you get this feeling of they are actually imprisoned in this school. I mean, this getting that story told through sound. So he put a microphone, one of his microphones, on the bars. And because he said that to Camilla and the photographer, then they shot a picture of the bars, and I mean, it became suddenly a kind of a part of this montage that we're gonna see now. So yeah, this scene that we're gonna see is this exam situation, and it starts out being like a very kind of neutral soundscape, and then slowly turning into, as you get inside the head of Sheeta, then you hear these other sounds that Jakob recorded. He also recorded like the kind of sound that changes the soundscape, the acoustic soundscape, is that when he's using his pencil. And Jakob also recorded that with microphones on the paper, so that you hear the sound of the pencil has a very significant sound. And then later on in this sequence that I'm going to show, the scene after that, Sheeta watches some boys play around with a bird in the schoolyard, and I think they glued the wings of the bird so that the bird couldn't fly anywhere and jumps around. That's kids for you nowadays. So Jakob put on one of his mics on the bird and recorded the heartbeat of the bird. So this deep throbbing sound that you're hearing is actually the sound of the bird through that sequence. But here comes these two scenes in a row.
This paper consists of 20 questions. We can start. Question number 1. Which of the following is the function of a skin? A, speaking. B, cover the inner part. C, protect the eyes from injury. Now you choose which one here is the correct answer. According to you. Number 2. The following are used in cleaning our body, except number 3. Soap helps to that is during washing clothes. Number 4. Sheeta Amos.
Okay, there was something about the sig. Well, weird. But yes, very subjective approach to getting inside the head of Sheeta. But a wonderful help having these sounds from the location already, which means that when the picture editor was editing these scenes, he could cut in these quite abstract sounds when he was editing the picture, so that instead of having to kind of think in your mind, well, okay, Peter's going to put in a very abstract sound and it'll go on for 20 seconds. I can hold on this image for quite this long, and then this. Then we actually had these abstract sounds as a part of his toolbox, that really made making scenes like this much easier, simply for timing and for the mood of it. And of course I evolved it a bit when I got when the picture editing was finished, but the general ideas of how to use the sound were very much integrated from the editing. This next scene is a scene that I brought along because originally when they were picture editing this, they had a piece of music on this scene, and it's a scene that happens about halfway through the film. The non-albino students or pupils have been away for the Christmas vacation, and now they're coming back. The albinos have been there all the time, and which means that suddenly this whole schoolyard is crazy with activity. And they had a piece of music playing there because they didn't have that much sound for this sequence, and it felt like you needed a lot of life, and so to say. But what I said when I saw this cut with the music on, I said, well, we don't need that music. I think we can establish all this activity better without music and just getting the playfulness of the kids and being there much more. I think music is an amazing resource when you're doing films, but you really have to think about what mood it establishes and what it does when it's there. The problem is, I think, my problem about music is that it can sometimes create a distance. It can sometimes tell you that subconsciously that you're watching a film and everything is going to be okay. And then when you see something like No Country for Old Men, it's much more intense because there's no score in that film. For this scene, I liked that there was no score because I wanted to be there with the kids and feel their immediate energy and their playfulness. And so therefore, I brought in lots of sounds for this sequence, and we're gonna see this sequence starting out with the full mix and then going to the Foley and then the effects. But I'll talk a bit between the different clips. Yeah, maybe we should just actually move on to the next clip. It's gonna be, I think that's only Foley. Yeah, the Foley sounds of this sequence so that you can see the different layers we were playing around with. Yeah, suddenly, it's like an abstract art piece, you know. We're getting close to the end. Time is running. I'm thinking that there's one more clip I'd like to show, which is the final clip. Which is kind of like the dramatic peak of the film. I'm a big fan of Terrence Malick, and this film was very inspired by some of his work, especially Tree of Life. Some of the ideas that he used is like using a lot of nature sounds of nature to establish moods, but also kind of letting the sounds of nature become music, and letting quite often the music kind of grow out from the sounds. So he has this idea of you should never be able to hear when the music begins and when it ends. It should just be there suddenly, like coming from the sounds. And well, we tried to achieve that in this film, but the idea of like using nature sounds as a kind of musical instrument was very much the idea here. So I think we'll see this last clip with it, which is a big thunderstorm, and notice how the sound evolves throughout the process, throughout the sequence. We're trying to start very quiet and build and build and build and build and build and build and build. And this was one of the sequences where, when they were editing it, they were kind of, what's often happening in the editing is that you get tired of all the quiet moments, the breaks, because you feel that your film is getting slow. And the more you've seen the film, the slower it gets. And so you're quite often cutting out all the breaks and the silences. And what I said to the editor when I saw this sequence close to the final edit, the final cut, then I said, well, I really like this sequence, but you have to drag out almost each shot for like a couple of seconds or even more to kind of make space for the nature sounds, but also especially for the thunderstorm that's coming up at the end of this clip. So let's see this, and then afterwards questions.
I don't. What? What? Hyena. Might be vegan there. Because yes. But I do love that. Stones. See. We see hyena. See, hyena. Lizard.
The final results are here.
I guess it's time for a few questions if you have some more questions or...
I just wonder with that last thing, which was amazing, I wonder if you know how the recordist got the whispered dialogue, because I didn't see any like radio mics, and they were quite far away at one.
There's radio mics on them, yeah. And but a great thing for these for this film was that the director was the boom operator, so she listened all the time and was very aware of how things sounded, and that just made, in a way, like it was such a gift to me because she was like all the time thinking about how the sound was, and just very, I mean, when you put on a set of headphones, then you suddenly become aware of how reality sounds. And so she boomed everything into a Zoom recorder, one of these small Zooms, and then they synced up everything afterwards.
So boomed it into the Zoom and then had radios?
Yeah, going into the Zoom as well. Right. Usually just a radio mic on him, right. The main character.
So all the sound for that was done on the Zoom, just 2-channel Zoom?
Yeah. But yeah, so yeah, yep, that's another reason for these. I mean, these small hard disk recorders are really like a gift for sound designers. So yeah, she was really aware of the sounds, and she felt when something sounded bad, she was saying, "Oh, I'm sorry, Peter, I just couldn't get the boom right there." And well, it's rare you hear those kind of words from a director.
The scene in the schoolyard.
Yeah.
Was there any sync in there at all?
With the bird?
No, with the cattle and the.
Yeah. There was a lot. They pretty much all. When you heard the ambience track, there were no kids talking. So all the kids talking was from the actual boom mic. Right. So yeah, we had a lot of that and cut on top of each other. The picture editor was very aware of the sound, so he put a lot of like location sounds on top of each other to kind of create this feeling. But what the thing was that without those kind of like the cattle didn't say anything, for example. Yeah. But when you took away the music, then it felt like very empty. That those, I mean, it just that the scene became funnier with those cattle sounds on them. Yeah, and then all this layering of Foley sounds. I mean, what people's there's a tendency to say, well, Foley is quite expensive. You have to hire a studio and get a Foley artist and all that. And what I do usually on documentaries is that on a fiction film you pretty much Foley everything, because you need to do an international version where you can take away the dialogue and you can sell it to other territories. Well, on a documentary, what I kind of do is to just pick all the specific moments where I know that we're going to need some additional Foley sounds for footsteps and so on. But so there's in something like this, there's Foley in, I don't know, 20% of the film or something, and just very few, a lot of spotting here and there, and that makes it possible for like a low-budget film like this to get Foley in it. You just have to be very exact about what you need, yeah, and I'll usually then do it like halfway through the sound editing, so that I know, okay, we're gonna need it right there and right there and right there.
And you get somebody to do it for you, or you Foley it?
I usually I work with a German Foley artist and a Finnish Foley artist, and I kind of go back and forth between the two. And this is done by this German guy who I work with a lot. The thing about a dedicated Foley artist is that he's quicker and better, and he can do these footsteps. I mean, he's doing it like that, and I would be standing like this, like for hours just to do like a few scenes.
And did he Foley the cattle?
Yeah.
Right. Do you know what he used?
Yeah. You can Foley everything. Yeah.
How did he do the cattle? Do you know?
I'm not sure, but I mean, you have all kind of of weird things. You can, I mean, sometimes you can also just do it like that, and then maybe have something on top of it with some nails or something. I don't know. There's so many tricks, and you really don't want to know all the tricks, because then it's no fun anymore.
Was there reverb on the children?
Yeah, I did I did some kind of trying to add some reverb for this schoolyard. I'm a big fan of reverb, but of course it can feel unnatural sometimes. But I felt that when playing with all the other elements, it felt very natural. But when hearing it alone, it kind of felt, okay, what's going on? It's this weird big space. But I feel that often when I'm really very much into the, I mean, also when recording sound, it's very rare that if I want to record the sound that I wouldn't go all the way up to the sound source. I would kind of stand like a meter away. I'm really into the way that sound spreads into a space and changes personality almost, so that a sound in a space is so much different, and that's what I really like about reverb. I mean, yesterday when I was arriving with the tube, I went down some staircase and was in a tunnel, and I then heard the train that I had just been traveling on, like leaving on top of the tunnel in a way. And then it sounded so amazing, I just had to get my recorder out and standing there for like 5 minutes, and people passing by and thinking, what the hell is this guy doing? But the space around the sound suddenly made it into music in a way. And I really love this way of what space does with sound. I mean, how the space around sound, how the acoustics change our perception of sound, and how it can turn into something else, and quite often something way more beautiful than the original sound ever was. I mean, this was like a symphony of sounds, and I could have been standing there for quite a long time. But I mean, I wouldn't really like to lie under the train and record those sounds. So there's something about how space, changes sound into something else that I really like. And it's also something that I talked with a great music producer, Howie B, who did some work with Björk and U2 and so on. And he said that for him, when he was recording an album, recording a musician, recording a guitar player, for example, he wasn't just recording the sound of the amplifier, he was recording the sound of how the guitar player felt, how the vibe was in the room, how the guitar player felt that morning. And I mean, the idea of a sound not just being one sound, but being like a part of environment is very interesting to me, and something that now I'm talking a lot about it, and I know that when I'm in the situation, it's much more subconscious. But I'm really into how sound evolves in space in a way. Okay, over there. That's just a small Samsung.
Is it like just a hand digital?
Yeah, exactly. I've got 5 of those or something. And then I've also got like this Sound Devices 744, which is a much more like advanced hard disk recorder. And I use that if I know that, okay, now I'm going into the field and recording a hand grenade rehearsal, for example. I did that at a certain point. Like then I know I needed some good gear. But for like every day, then I mean, I could have that Samsung that's in my pocket, and it's very easy to just switch it on, and then it's there. Because otherwise, all those sounds, you would never be able to capture them. And the quality that these machines, like I use the Samsung, I have a Zoom, Microtrack, and Edirol. All these machines, they sound pretty good. I mean, you need to EQ it slightly, but it goes into the film, and it sounds, it has texture and it has life. There was someone down there.
You know the first scene where we're on the bus and the music's in the background and we hear that track passing. Did you pitch that sound? Because it sounds very musical. It's almost like together with the music.
Yeah, I didn't. It was actually in a pretty good pitch, but I moved it so that it fitted better. But I do a lot of that. Yeah, I do a lot of pitching and moving around and thinking a lot about the rhythm of the sounds that I'm using, so that it's not just the pitch. It's also when someone is talking, you can then in the break, then you can have like a dog barking, or like a door being closed or something, and then they can speak on them. I mean, the way that you can orchestrate small, tiny sounds to kind of create an environment, but it's in a musical way, so that the voice also turns into an instrument, and it has a rhythm that goes with the other sounds that also have rhythms. So I do a lot of like moving around things and thinking a lot about rhythm really, I mean, lots of these things are just intuitively done, but then afterwards I feel if it's not done in rhythm, then I'm moving them naturally into a rhythm. And also, like the films, in the beginning of the film, you hear these drops of water, and those are put into a rhythm so that they go together with the beginning of Johan Johansson's music with these bells that start, so that it says dip, 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 ding, ding, ding. Like the piece of music already begins with the first sound, And I think that's a way of kind of making it into a more fluid experience and making the music grow naturally from the film. One last question, or?
Absolutely.
Okay.
As long as you can go on.
Yeah.
I just wondered how the dialogue edit evolved over these documentaries that you were involved in, and if that is a process that you were either involved in or in charge of, in terms of how it related to the rest of the soundtrack.
Yeah. The dialogue edit is incredibly important, and it's amazing how with the tools that we have available now, how much noise and weird sounds you can remove and make the dialogue understandable. Of course, the White Black Boy sounded pretty good to begin with, because there was a lot of care taken into that. It sounded good when they were doing the shoot, and it wasn't a very noisy location. But a lot of the stuff in Putin was very bad. And there's these, for those of you with those sound nerds, sound software nerds, like stuff like Isotope, we use that a lot. I've got I'm working with a dialogue editor who's really like specialized in that. It's an art form almost to do this kind of dialogue editing. So I don't do it hands-on myself, but I'm there all the time and checking, and I'm really like, I'm very sensitive to like even the smallest kind of weird noise or anything that doesn't fit with the soundtrack. I mean, the thing about documentary sound is that, and also actually in fiction films, I quite like that it's not totally cleaned up. I like that it's rough around the edges. It makes it more real and more alive. I mean, I think if it becomes too clean, then that's not how life is. I mean, life is dirty, and that's why I like this textured dialogue with what I call it. Instead of calling it noisy dialogue, we call it textured dialogue. You know, it just sounds better. So of course we remove a lot of noise, but we also keep some of it because it's actually an integral part of the track. But yes, there's quite a lot of time spent on that, and it's a lot of hard work.
Thanks so much for coming. Great. Thank you.